Today is a very important day, but also a very heavy day. It's August 23rd, and it is International Day of Remembrance of the slave trade and its abolition. I want to share some thoughts today about the topic, and while I do that, I'm actually just going to show some numbers. It's going to be a very simple presentation, but I hope that you're able to just kind of absorb the why, the when, the how, the who, all of these questions that come up when this topic arises. And so I'm just going to share some thoughts with you, and I hope that you're able to, again, just kind of ponder today, remember what has happened in the past, and also look toward the future and into the present of how are we healing from this, what are we going to do about this issue. So as I said, today is the International Day of Remembrance of the slave trade and its abolition, August 23rd. This day was established by the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, or UNESCO. In the United States, many people look to 1619 as the day when the first enslaved African individual was brought to the United States, before, of course, the U.S. was founded as a country. However, reports of earlier transits have been established, and so some actually move that date back to 1502. But whether you start at 1502 or 1619, we do know that there are 250 to 365 years of slavery, and in the United States, chattel slavery is really unlike any other system of enslavement in any other country around the world, whereby people were enslaved not only for generations, but also through matriarchal heritage laws, which meant if you are born to an enslaved mother, you are considered her master's property and have zero human rights for not only the entirety of your life, but the lives of your descendants as well. After the end of slavery in America, there were about 100 years of what's known as the Jim Crow era, essentially apartheid in America, which were separate and unequal laws and treatment, including a very deadly lynching period, loitering laws, sunset towns, and many other atrocities that led not only to many murders, but also countless people unjustly incarcerated. Some people, again, would start at 1877 when Jim Crow laws were instituted, and some people would actually move the needle back to just 1865 after the Emancipation Proclamation, because as soon as individuals were freed from plantations, in many cases, most cases, they were not treated equally with the rest of American society. So again, about 100 years of Jim Crow adding on to the initial sin of chattel slavery in America. So in addition to the 250 plus years of slavery and 100 years of Jim Crow, there have been 150 years and counting of institutionalized racism in education, in economic development, in housing policies, in healthcare, in public services, in policing, in surveillance, and unjust sentencing that has affected the surviving descendants of individuals who were enslaved under chattel slavery. Now, when we talk about things in the past, a lot of times there are differences in opinion about what statistics and what figures to actually count. In fact, there are differences in opinion on a lot of things because people alive today were not alive 400 years ago. So all we have to work with is what we have passed down through generations, through oral tradition, and also through histories and writings. So when we talk about the slave trade, the total estimated casualties from the slave trade could really reach 200 million, but the survivors that typically get counted are the 10.7 million who survived and actually arrived in the United States. But that 200 million figure really is a broader picture of all of the deaths in terms of the process of capture, which was met with, of course, much resistance and much death, uprooted families, children left behind with no parents, other people killed, during the capture process, transport process from a capture point to a port, lots of death along that journey, as well as death along the transport across the Atlantic. So we're talking about millions of lives, whether you start with 10.7 million or expand to all of the lives that had been impacted or ended during this period of 400 or 500 years of colonialism and that culminating in the slave trade. So on this day of remembrance, I really want to add my voice to the throng of those who are calling for long overdue reparations for the transatlantic slave trade. Why am I doing this video? Mostly because I really believe that we have to look back to the past to inform the present and the future. But by looking back, we need to focus on not just the problems, but also the solutions. Meaning, of course, we can't undo everything that has been done, but there is a way forward. There is a way toward healing, and that would be reparations. What would reparations do? I believe it would accomplish three things. It would be a confession of the wrong. It would also be a tangible form of restitution for survivors and their direct descendants. It also would be closure. I don't believe that there can be forgiveness or healing unless there is a confession and a form of justice or restitution. Those two things have to come before closure or healing. So would reparations fix the slave trade? No, it would not fix everything. It wouldn't undo what has been done. But it's the only closest action America can take to finally face and really deal with this ancient wound that really continues to bleed in the form of racism. So reparations were promised, then they were canceled. Well, actually, the slave owners in the South were given reparations because every former slave owner was given $300 per freed slave. But the reparations promised to freed slaves were not given. And in fact, they were given nothing for generations of unpaid work, for rape, for torture. And since then, nothing tangible has been done to make amends for the crimes against humanity that chattel slavery caused in America. So we do need reparations, but how much and in what form and to whom should not be decided by me or by you, but by a qualified commission that comes to a thoughtful consensus about what is fair and how to implement it. It's not only time, but it's long overdue. And I believe that there can be no forgiveness without confession and no healing or closure without meaningful restitution. So what is really standing in the way of this? I believe that racism is the biggest hurdle standing in the way of reparations, and also with that, ignorance, because a lot of racism is based on ignorance of the actual history, not only of the realities of chattel slavery in the United States, but also the history of the United States and other countries actually agreeing to reparations for other human rights abuses, such as the Japanese internment camps, apartheid, and the Holocaust. And again, I said the U.S. and other countries as some examples of those reparations decisions. So when it comes to the questions of why, who, how much, and when, hopefully the question of why has already been answered by now in this conversation. As for who, would I get reparations? No. Would Trevor Noah get reparations? He's already talked about that. No. Would anybody who has come here who looks black, identifies black, or otherwise associates or affiliates with the black community in America be receiving reparations other than direct descendants of formerly enslaved people in America? No, it would just be the survivors and their direct descendants who would be getting reparations. that much shouldn't even be up for debate because, as we know, with any murder trial, there is a perpetrator and there's a victim. And the person being put on trial, of course, isn't a person. In this case, it's a country. But America has perpetrated these crimes against humanity in the form of chattel slavery towards specific people. So the victims can be, many of them can be named, and their descendants can be directly traced. And so those are the people who would be getting reparations. So how much would reparations cost? My opinion is that it should be no less than 4.6 trillion, but could be as much as 50 trillion owed. I do believe that the debt of, or the promise of, the 40 acres and a mule really was the check that was written. That was the promise that was given. And so that could easily be allocated today for what that would be worth, and how many people should be receiving that with interest. However, I don't think that I should make the decision on the amount or any single person. I think that this would be for an appointed reparations commission, as I stated earlier, to sort out the particulars. But arguing about an amount or arguing about who receives it or all the details really distracts from the fundamental need for a commission of qualified individuals to be formed, and the promise made again to pay a meaningful and substantial amount to atone for slavery, period. Another question that I'm not quite sure how people come to ask is, when should reparations happen? In my opinion, that's pretty obvious. It should happen yesterday. It should happen now. It's the check that has been marked insufficient funds that Martin Luther King talked about. America loves to, of course, celebrate Martin Luther King, but picks and chooses which parts of his speeches to emphasize. And when you get a check returned, you not only have to find sufficient funds to issue a new check to pay your rent, for example, but you also have to pay an overdraft charge to the bank. So America wrote a bad check when they promised 40 acres and a mule, then delivered nothing but more racism and challenge to survivors of chattel slavery and their descendants. So sure, interest has accrued, but it's always the right time to do the right thing, and doing something by addressing at least the original debt is better than doing nothing. So again, if a crime is committed, say somebody kills a man, a woman, or a child, it is not only an injustice for that person to go free and to have no consequences, but it is an injustice every single day that he is not making amends in some form. So the debt in America, the debt for chattel slavery, is only getting deeper the longer we wait. The debt is never going to go away until it's actually paid. Some people say it's unrealistic to expect reparations, or it's never going to happen. But what's really unrealistic is to expect generations of descendants of survivors to forget, to forgive, and to move on without justice being served in some form. So in closing, what does reparations really mean? It means making amends for a wrong done. So on this International Day of Remembrance of the slave trade and its abolition, I ask America, what will you do to make amends for this wrong? So I hope that this really short video has given you a few things to think about on this topic. I look forward to reading your comments, and I really had to do a video today because this is just so important, such an important issue to me, and I think it's important to discuss it on the day of International Day of Remembrance, which actually we're behind time in the time zone, so I'm actually going to be posting this at the end of the day here on August 22nd, but it's already August 23rd in many countries around the world, including many African countries. So I'm going to post it in a timely manner for people watching around the world. And meanwhile, I'm going to get back to braiding my hair because I'm only halfway done, which is why I'm wearing a hat. But I had to stop to just talk about this topic because it's just so important. So I look forward to the discussion.